Monaco Harbor glittered like broken glass under the Mediterranean sun. 30,000 spectators lined the waterfront, cameras, raised voices, hushed to near silence, as the Aurora Crown carved through crystalline water at 48 knots. Marcus Grant's hands rested on the helm with the certainty of a man who had spent 15 years commanding the sea, every muscle memory firing in perfect sequence as he initiated the Sterling Spiral, a maneuver that hadn't been attempted in competition for 41 years. The yacht banked hard, engines roaring as the spiral tightened. 49 knots. 50. Catherine Sterling stood in the VIP box, hands pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face as she watched the man she'd mocked 6 months earlier perform what the commentators were already calling the finest piece of seamanship witnessed in a generation. The spiral completed. The Aurora Crown stopped exactly where it began, facing the precise heading it had started from. 30,000 people erupted screaming, throwing programs into the air. The screen cut to black. White text appeared 6 months earlier. Chicago Marina at 5 in the morning carried the smell of diesel fuel and dead fish. Marcus Grant pushed his mop across the Aurora Crown's main deck, making his 195th circuit of the same polished teak he'd cleaned every morning for 3 years. The motion had become automatic, requiring no conscious thought, leaving his mind free to drift to places he spent most nights trying to forget. Leah had been gone 3 years of lung cancer that took her in 18 months, leaving him with a son and an empty bed. The white crew uniform hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight since the funeral, the kind of slow erosion that happens when a man forgets to eat. His phone buzzed. Text from Nadine Brooks, his neighbor who watched Isaiah most evenings. He's asking about boats again. When are you going to tell him? Marcus deleted the message without responding. The sun crept over Lake Michigan's eastern horizon, painting the water in shades that reminded him of mornings on the Coast Guard cutter Vigilant, when he'd stood watch at 0500 and believed the ocean was something he'd spend his entire life mastering. That man felt like someone else now. He finished the deck, moved to the corridor outside the executive boardroom. Through the frosted glass, he could see shapes moving, hear muffled voices discussing quarterly projections. Victoria Cross's silhouette was distinctive, even in shadow, rigid posture, sharp gestures. The door opened. Victoria emerged, phone pressed to her ear, coffee cup in her opposite hand. She didn't look at Marcus as she passed, didn't acknowledge his existence. The coffee hit his chest before his brain registered movement. Hot liquid soaked through his uniform, spreading across his sternum in a dark stain. Victoria kept walking, her phone still to her ear, voice never wavering. No apology, no glance backward, just the continued sound of her heels clicking against polished floor. Marcus stood perfectly still. The coffee dripped onto the deck he'd just cleaned. 3 years, 52 incidents. 52 times he'd swallowed his rage, changed his shirt, and kept working because Isaiah needed food and the electric bill didn't pay itself. Rachel Klein, a stewardess barely out of college, passed by with her hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking with barely suppressed laughter. He collected his mop and headed to the supply closet. Russ Donovan was waiting there, arms crossed. 64 years old, built like a man who'd spent 4 decades working on vessels with hands that could splice cable or break a jaw, depending on circumstance. He'd been Navy, and he recognized a warrior when he saw one, even a warrior who'd forgotten his own strength. He held out a clean uniform shirt without comment. Marcus took it, began changing in the narrow space between shelving units. Russ pulled a manila folder from his bag. The tab read, Incidents. Grant M. Documentation. Marcus had seen the folder before. Each incident dated, time-stamped, witnessed. Rachel's laughter just now would be entry 52. Russ's voice came out quiet. That's 52. Every incident, every witness, every date. Marcus buttoned the fresh shirt. What am I supposed to do with documentation? Russ Sue get blacklisted from every maritime employer in the Great Lakes. I have a 7-year-old son. I need this job. Russ's expression didn't change. Maybe nothing today, but one day you won't need this job. And when that day comes, you'll need this folder. He handed Marcus a second folder, thicker. The tab read, Pattern Analysis, Sterling Maritime, 2017-2024. Marcus opened it. The first page showed a spreadsheet, 91 names, dates of hire, dates of termination, demographic information, settlement amounts. 87% of terminated employees were either black or working class white. Average tenure for black employees, 13 months. For white employees, 4.6 years. Settlements totaling $2.4 million, all buried under non-disclosure agreements. Victoria Cross's promotion history correlated exactly with spikes in minority employee turnover. Russ's voice carried weight. I've been documenting for 7 years. Every black deckhand, every Hispanic steward, every working-class white engineer, all gone within 18 months. All voluntary resignations, all with settlement checks and silence agreements. Marcus closed the folder. Why show me this? Russ's smile carried no humor. Because you're the only one who can do anything about it. Former Coast Guard officer. You understand chain of evidence, federal procedures, how to build a case that sticks. Marcus handed the folder back. I can't risk this job. Isaiah asks me every morning when I'm coming home. If I start making noise, that answer becomes never. Russ didn't take the folder. Your son asks you every hour when you'll be a captain again. What are you teaching him right now to accept being dismissed, to let people like Victoria Cross define his worth? The words landed like body blows. Marcus had been asking himself the same questions for 3 years. He took the folder. Russ gave a small nod of satisfaction. Marcus's apartment was a 2-bedroom walk-up on Chicago's South Side. Rent was $875 a month, which was manageable if he never ate out, never bought new clothes. His checking account currently held $52 3 days before payday. Isaiah Grant had his mother's eyes warm brown that went amber in direct sunlight, and his father's stubborn chin. 7 years old, first grade reading at a 3rd grade level because Leah had started him on chapter books before she got sick, and Marcus had kept the tradition alive. The boy was at the kitchen table when Marcus walked in at 6:15 p.m. drawing with colored pencils. The drawing showed a sailboat with 2 stick figures on the deck. Above the boat, written in careful block letters, Dad plus me, bigger than the sky. Marcus's chest tightened. He'd said those words to Isaiah once, trying to explain how ships worked. If you build something right, if you understand the physics, you can make something bigger than the sky itself. Isaiah had latched onto the phrase, repeated it whenever he talked about boats. The boy looked up, gap-toothed smile splitting his face. Dad, look what I drew. It's us on a boat. Marcus knelt beside the table. That's beautiful, buddy. Really beautiful. Isaiah's finger traced the taller stick figure. That's you. You're the captain. And I'm learning. Marcus forced his voice steady. Maybe someday, Isaiah, when you're older. The boy's face scrunched in confusion. But you already know how. Nadine says you used to be a captain, a real one. His voice came out rougher than intended. That was a long time ago, buddy. Different life. Isaiah persisted. But you could captain a ship again, right, if you wanted to. Marcus looked at his son, 7 years old, everything ahead of him. What was he teaching this boy by hiding? He deflected. How about we make spaghetti? You can help with the sauce. Isaiah's face lit up. The questions about sailing evaporated, replaced by chatter about school and his friend Tommy and the science project due next month about how boats float. Bigger than the sky, Marcus thought as he stirred sauce. He'd told Isaiah that boats could be bigger than the sky if you built them right, but he'd forgotten to mention that sometimes you built yourself too small to captain them. The nightmare came at 3 a.m. Brandon Hayes' face, 24 years old, the alarm screaming, the rogue wave, the cable snapping, Brandon's voice asking the question that had echoed through Marcus's skull for 2,037 nights. What do we do? Commander Marcus sat bolt upright, sweat soaking through his shirt. He checked his phone 17 a.m. Wouldn't go back to sleep. Never did. Cape Hatteras, March 14, 2019. 5 years, 7 months, and 12 days ago. The fishing trawler Seawolf taking on water in 40-foot seas, 7 crew clinging to a vessel 90 seconds from capsizing. Radar had shown an anomaly 5.8 nautical miles northeast. Weather pattern indicating possible rogue wave formation. Probability 18%. Acceptable risk under standard operating procedures. Marcus had assessed, calculated, made the call, deploy Brandon Hayes. The wave had been 58 feet tall when it hit. The Seawolf had broken apart. The rescue cable had snapped. And Brandon Hayes had drowned 30 feet from the Coast Guard cutter Vigilant while Marcus watched through binoculars. The investigation had cleared Marcus. Equipment failure, act of God, acceptable risk assessment, no commander error, full reinstatement offered. Marcus had resigned 3 weeks later. Couldn't touch a helm without hearing Brandon's voice. Couldn't look at water without seeing that final moment. Leah had been diagnosed 4 months after Marcus resigned. Stage 4 lung cancer, January 2020. Prognosis, 18 months if treatment worked. The treatment hadn't worked. Marcus had buried his wife in July 2021, held Isaiah's hand at the funeral while the boy sobbed and asked why mommy wasn't waking up. The deckhand job at Sterling Maritime had been perfect, mindless work, steady paycheck, home by 6 p.m. every day. Marcus Grant disappeared into the role, and for 3 years it had worked. Until Victoria Cross spilled coffee on him and Russ Donovan handed him folders full of evidence that staying unnoticed was its own form of cowardice. Marcus got out of bed, made coffee he wouldn't drink. Isaiah appeared in the doorway dragging his stuffed whale. "Dad, you okay?" Marcus forced a smile. "Yeah, buddy, just couldn't sleep. Go back to bed." The boy shuffled closer, leaned against Marcus's leg. "You have the bad dream again, smart kid. Noticed too much." Marcus ran his hand through Isaiah's hair. "Just a dream, Isaiah, nothing to worry about." Isaiah's voice came out small. What are you scared of, Dad?" The question hung in the kitchen. What was he scared of failing again? Losing someone else? Being responsible for another death? Discovering that Marcus Grant fundamentally lacked whatever quality separated competent commanders from great ones? He gave the only answer he could manage. "I'm scared of letting you down, buddy." Isaiah squeezed tighter. "You don't let me down, Dad. You're the best." Marcus carried his son back to bed, waited until breathing evened out, then returned to the kitchen in the gray pre-dawn light that made Chicago look like a city painted in shades of regret. His phone sat on the counter, Russ's folders beside it. 91 employees, 2.4 million in buried settlements, 7 years of systematic discrimination that would continue unless someone decided to make noise. The sun rose at 6:42 a.m. Marcus showered, dressed, drove Isaiah to school, and arrived at Sterling Maritime at 7:15 a.m. The Aurora Crown sat in its berth like a monument to wealth he'd never touch. $90 million of precision engineering capable of crossing oceans, commanding seas. Marcus had captained vessels like this once. Not Yacht's Coast Guard cutters designed for rescue, but the principle was the same. He hadn't made that decision with Brandon Hayes. Had made the wrong call. Had paid for it every night since. The alarm started screaming at 10:47 a.m. Marcus was in the corridor near the engine room when he heard it, the high-pitched wail that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Crew members ran past him. He followed on instinct. The engine room was chaos. David Garrison, chief engineer, stood by the starboard engine with terror on his face. Digital readouts showed temperature climbing into red zones. Automatic shutdown protocols had engaged, but something had failed. Garrison's voice cracked. "We're dead in the water. Emergency haul out in 20 minutes, or the engine seizes $30,000 in repairs minimum." 3 engineers clustered around the console arguing, none doing anything useful. Marcus stepped forward. "It's a coolant pump cavitation issue. You need to execute a manual bypass." Garrison spun around, saw the deckhand uniform. "Unless you're a marine engineer, get out." Marcus's voice came out calm, certain. "I'm not. But I was damage control officer on USCG Cutter Stratton for 6 years. I've run this exact procedure 40 times. Manual bypass, bleed the pressure, restore flow. 11 minutes if you move now." Garrison stared at him. Marcus was already moving toward the control panel. The next 11 minutes were pure muscle memory. Identify the blockage point, isolate the system, execute manual bypass, bleed excess pressure, monitor temperature drop, reinitialize primary flow. The temperature gauge dropped from red to yellow to green. The engine hummed back to life. Marcus stepped back, wiped his hands on his uniform, and started to leave. Garrison caught his arm. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus pulled free. "Nobody. Just a deckhand who knows engines." He walked out before the chief engineer could press further. Catherine Sterling Darling had watched the entire sequence from the upper deck observation window. She stood there now, tablet in hand, finger hovering over Marcus Grant's personnel file. The document she'd opened 30 seconds after watching a man in a deckhand uniform execute master-level engineering procedures. The file was sparse. 3 years employment, 0 disciplinary actions, perfect attendance, no college degree listed, no technical certifications, nothing that explained what she just witnessed. She descended to the lower deck, found Russ Donovan near the supply closet. Her voice came out sharp. "That deckhand, Marcus Grant, how long has he worked here?" Russ's expression gave away nothing. 3 years, ma'am." Catherine studied the older man's face. "And he's been cleaning decks that entire time." Russ met her eyes. "That's what he asked for. Quiet work, no responsibility. Home by 6 p.m. every day. No questions." The implication hung between them. Marcus Grant was hiding. The question was why. She didn't push further, not yet. but she made a mental note to revisit Marcus Grant's file when she had time to ask harder questions. Isaiah Grant punched Tommy Henderson in the face at 1:47 p.m. during recess at Marquette Elementary School. The fight lasted 6 seconds. Both boys were marched to Principal Walsh's office. Nadine Brooks arrived first. She found Isaiah sitting with arms crossed, jaw set, in stubborn defiance that reminded her of his father. Principal Walsh gestured Nadine into her office. Isaiah struck another student. This is his first incident, but I need to understand what prompted it. Nadine looked at Isaiah. Want to tell me what happened, baby? Isaiah's voice came out tight, furious. Tommy said my dad can't sail boats. He said black people don't captain boats. He said they just clean them. The principal's expression shifted discomfort, recognition that this conversation was about to get complicated. Nadine's voice went very quiet. And where did Tommy learn that? Tommy's mother arrived before anyone could answer. Shelley Henderson took one look at her son's split lip and her face went red. Shelley's voice came out shrill. That boy attacked my son. I want him expelled. Principal Walsh raised a hand. Mrs. Henderson, please. We're gathering information. Shelley pointed at Isaiah. There's nothing to gather. Look at Tommy's face. Nadine stood slowly, putting herself between Shelley Henderson and Isaiah. That child has a name. Isaiah. And before you start calling him violent, maybe ask your son what he said to provoke a fight. Shelley's face went from red to purple. Tommy doesn't provoke. He's a good boy from a good family. The implication hung in the air. Good family, not like Isaiah's family. Nadine's voice dropped to something dangerous. Isaiah's father works 65 hours a week, never misses bedtime. Isaiah reads 2 grades ahead because Marcus Grant is a spectacular father who puts his son first every single day. Principal Walsh intervened. Mrs. Brooks, please. Nadine turned on the principal. You want to talk productive? Let's talk about why an 8-year-old thinks black people can't be captains. Where did Tommy Henderson learn that? The principal's expression closed down. I can assure you this school has zero tolerance for discrimination. Nadine cut her off. Then perhaps you should address why one of your students felt comfortable saying black people only clean boats. Because Isaiah's father was a United States Coast Guard lieutenant commander before he worked as a deckhand. Maybe Tommy should learn that. The room went silent. Shelley Henderson's mouth opened and closed without sound. Principal Walsh looked like she'd been slapped. Tommy stared at Isaiah with new uncertainty. Isaiah sat up straighter, some of the fight draining from his posture. His father had been a lieutenant commander. A real captain. Tommy Henderson was wrong. Principal Walsh recovered. I see. Well, that changes things somewhat. Nadine wasn't done. Isaiah will serve whatever punishment you decide is appropriate for fighting. But before that happens, I want Tommy Henderson to explain where he learned that black people can't be captains. Shelley Henderson grabbed Tommy's hand. We're leaving. I'll be contacting the school board. She dragged her son out. Principal Walsh looked at Nadine with something approaching respect. Mrs. Brooks, I appreciate your passion, but Isaiah still struck another student. 2 days in school suspension. Nadine accepted the terms, collected Isaiah, and drove him back to Marcus's apartment in silence. When they arrived, she knelt down to Isaiah's eye level. Mom, you did wrong, baby. Hitting isn't how we solve problems. Isaiah's voice came out small. I know. Nadine pulled him into a hug. But I understand why you did it. Isaiah's face pressed against her shoulder. Is it true? Was Dad really a lieutenant commander? Nadine's chest tightened. Yeah, baby, he was. A real captain. Saved people's lives. Was a hero. Isaiah pulled back, eyes wet. Then why did Tommy say? Nadine cut him off gently. Because some people are small. They make themselves feel big by making other people feel small. But your daddy, he's bigger than the sky, Isaiah, and one day he's going to remember that. She called Marcus at 3:30 p.m., left a voicemail. Isaiah's okay, but he got in a fight at school, punched a kid who said black people can't be captains. 2-day suspension. And Marcus? He was defending you because he believes in you. Maybe it's time you believed in yourself. Marcus listened to the message at 6:05 p.m. sitting in his car outside the apartment building. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white. Isaiah had fought for him, had punched another kid because someone tried to erase who Marcus had been. 7 years old, already learning that the world would try to diminish him. Marcus climbed the stairs, found Isaiah at the kitchen table doing homework, avoiding eye contact. He sat down across from his son. Nadine told me what happened. Isaiah's pencil stilled. I'm sorry. Marcus reached across the table, lifted Isaiah's chin. Don't apologize for standing up for what's right, But hitting isn't the answer, buddy. You understand that? Isaiah nodded miserably. Marcus's voice went softer. Tommy Henderson was wrong about me, about black people, about everything, but you don't teach people they're wrong by punching them. Isaiah's eyes filled with tears. He said you only clean boats. He said you weren't a real captain. Marcus took a breath. I was a captain, Isaiah. Lieutenant commander in the Coast Guard. For 15 years. Rescued people. Commanded ships. Did important work. Isaiah's voice came out barely above a whisper. Then why did you stop? The question Marcus had been avoiding for 3 years. He tried. I lost someone. A young man under my command. And after that, I couldn't sail anymore. Couldn't be responsible for other people's lives when I'd already failed someone who trusted me. Isaiah processed this. But you didn't mean to lose him, right? Marcus's throat closed up. No, I didn't mean to. Isaiah reached across the table, put his small hand over Marcus's larger one. Then it wasn't your fault. Accidents happen. That's what Mrs. Walsh says. The simplicity of it broke something in Marcus's chest. A 7-year-old's logic cutting through 3 years of self-recrimination. Accidents happen. Not everything that goes wrong is someone's fault. Brandon Hayes had died in an accident. The investigation had confirmed it. Marcus had spent 2,037 nights telling himself the investigation was wrong. But maybe Isaiah was right. Maybe carrying Brandon's death as personal failure was its own form of pride, assuming he should have been able to prevent the unpreventable. Marcus squeezed his son's hand. You're pretty smart. You know that. Isaiah's gap-toothed smile returned. Mom used to say that. The mention of Leah sent the familiar ache through Marcus's chest, but it felt different this time. Less like drowning, more like remembering something precious. He pulled Isaiah into a hug. I love you, buddy, and I'm proud of you for standing up for what you believe in, even if punching wasn't the right method. Isaiah hugged back fiercely. I love you too, Dad, and I think you should be a captain again, because you're really good at it. Marcus held his son and thought about Russ Donovan's folders, about 91 employees, about Victoria Cross spilling coffee, and a 7-year-old getting suspended for defending his father's dignity. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe Isaiah deserved to see his father whole. The phone call came at 5:47 a.m. the next morning while Marcus was making coffee and trying to figure out childcare for Isaiah's suspension. Catherine Sterling's voice carried an edge Marcus had never heard, panic barely controlled. Mr. Grant, I need you at the marina immediately. Marcus's hand tightened on his phone. Ma'am, my shift doesn't start until 8, and I have... Catherine cut him off. My mother is dying. She's in Nassau. Heart attack emergency surgery. I have 12 hours to get there, and every commercial flight is canceled because of Hurricane Melissa. I need someone who can captain the Aurora Crown through a Category 2 storm. And Russ Donovan tells me you're qualified. The world tilted. Marcus's mind flooded with thoughts. Brandon Hayes' hurricane procedures, the weight of command he'd sworn never to accept again. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Ma'am, I haven't captained anything in 5 years. You should call. Catherine's voice cracked. I called 12 captains, every qualified master mariner within 500 miles. They all refused because of the hurricane. You're my last option. Russ says you were Coast Guard rescue operations for 15 years. Hurricane response specialist. Is that true? Marcus couldn't deny it. Yes, ma'am. Catherine's breath came out shaky. Then I'm begging you, Mr. Grant. Get me to Nassau before my mother dies. Name your price. Marcus thought about Isaiah, about Nadine, about the question his son had asked. Why did you stop being a captain? His mouth opened before his brain authorized the words. I can get you there, Miss Sterling. I'll be at the marina in 20 minutes. He hung up, stared at his phone, then turned to find Isaiah standing in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas. The boy's eyes were wide. Dad, was that about sailing? Marcus knelt down. Yeah, buddy, a lady's mother is very sick. She needs me to sail her to help. Isaiah's face lit up. Like when you were a captain before. Marcus's throat tightened. Yeah, like that. Isaiah threw his arms around his father's neck. Mom told me you'd sail again. She told me in my dream last week. She said she's proud of you. Marcus held his son and felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening. He called Nadine, explained the situation, got her agreement to watch Isaiah. Then he went to his bedroom, to the dresser, to the drawer he hadn't opened in 3 years. Leah's letter sat exactly where he'd left it. White envelope, her handwriting in blue ink, for Marcus when you're ready to sail again. He picked it up, held it like something fragile and dangerous. 3 years unopened because reading it would make her death real in a way the funeral hadn't. Marcus almost opened it. His thumb slid under the envelope flap. Then he stopped. Not yet. He'd read it when he got back, when he'd proven he could still do this. He put the letter back, closed the drawer, and headed to Sterling Maritime to face the water for the first time in 2,037 days. The Aurora Crown's bridge smelled like leather and money, that particular combination of luxury materials that cost more per square foot than Marcus's entire apartment. He stood in the doorway for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, staring at the captain's chair he hadn't occupied since March 29, when he'd walked off the Coast Guard cutter Vigilant for the final time and sworn he'd never touch a helm again. His hands trembled. He shoved them in his pockets before anyone noticed. Catherine Sterling was already there, pacing near the navigation console with a phone pressed to her ear and desperation written across her face in lines that made her look 10 years older. She glanced up when Marcus entered, ended her call with a terse goodbye. Her eyes tracked him as he crossed to the captain's chair, watched him hesitate before sitting down like a man approaching an altar he'd been excommunicated from. The leather felt wrong under him, too soft, too expensive. Catherine's voice came out tight with controlled panic. Russ says you can do this. Marcus's fingers found the master control panel, muscle memory firing despite 5 years of disuse. Power systems, navigation array, engine diagnostics, ballast monitors, everything exactly where it should be, waiting for someone who understood the language. Yes, ma'am. She moved to the co-pilot seat, buckled in without being told. Smart woman. Marcus ran his pre-departure checklist, hands moving with precision that surprised him. 5 years should have created Rust hesitation. Instead, his training emerged intact, preserved in whatever part of the brain stored procedures too important to forget. Catherine watched him work, her expression shifting from desperation to assessment. She was seeing him for the first time, not the deckhand who mopped floors, but the officer he'd been. He keyed the radio, Chicago Marina. This is Aurora Crown requesting immediate departure clearance, destination Nassau, Bahamas, priority medical transport. The response came back after a pause that lasted too long. Aurora Crown confirmed captain credentials. Marcus's throat tightened. This was the moment. The point where he either committed to being someone he'd tried to bury or admitted he couldn't do this. His voice came out formal, carrying authority he'd forgotten he possessed. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Elijah Grant, United States Coast Guard, retired Master Mariner Certification Alpha Charlie 7743. 20 seconds of silence. Marcus could hear Catherine's breathing shallow and quick, could hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears. The radio crackled. Aurora Crown standby for verification. More silence. Marcus's hands rested on the throttle controls, waiting. The radio spoke again. Aurora Crown, you are cleared for immediate departure. Be advised, NOAA reports Hurricane Melissa currently 200 nautical miles off your projected route, intensifying to Category 3. Recommend extreme caution in continuous weather monitoring. Catherine's breath came out in a rush. Marcus engaged the engines. The Aurora Crown came alive beneath him with a vibration that traveled through the deck, plating into his bones. He'd forgotten this feeling, the moment when thousands of tons of engineering responded to his commands, became an extension of his will. He released the dock lines through remote controls, watched the monitors as automated systems retracted the moorings. The yacht drifted backward under minimal reverse thrust, exactly as he'd calculated. Victoria Cross stood on the dock, phone in hand, recording everything. Her face carried an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Disbelief mixed with something darker. Russ Donovan stood at the gangway, brought his hand up in a crisp salute. Marcus returned it through the bridge window, a gesture that felt simultaneously foreign and deeply right. The Aurora Crown cleared the marina at 24 knots, engines running smooth, systems optimal. Chicago's skyline receded behind them as Marcus set their heading southeast toward the St. Lawrence Seaway. Catherine hadn't spoken since departure. She sat in the co-pilot seat, watching Marcus with an intensity that felt like being studied under a microscope. Finally, she broke the silence. You weren't lying. Marcus kept his eyes on the navigation display. No, ma'am. Her voice carried a note he couldn't identify. Why have you been cleaning floors for 3 years? The question he'd been expecting. Marcus considered lying, considered deflecting. Instead, he told the truth. I lost someone. Ensign Brandon Hayes, 24 years old, under my command during a rescue operation. Investigation cleared me of wrongdoing, but I couldn't captain anymore. Couldn't be responsible for lives when I'd already failed someone who trusted me. Catherine absorbed this, processed it with the quick intelligence that had made her a CEO at 40. And now Marcus's jaw tightened. Now your mother is dying, and you need someone who knows how to navigate through a hurricane. So I'm doing what needs to be done. She accepted that and went quiet again. But Marcus could feel her reassessing everything she thought she knew about him. 2 hours into the voyage, Catherine's phone buzzed. She answered. He listened for 30 seconds, then her face went pale. Her voice came out, strangled. How long ago? Why wasn't I notified immediately? Marcus kept his attention split between navigation and Catherine's conversation. Catherine ended the call, sat motionless for 10 seconds before speaking. My mother went into cardiac arrest during surgery. They revived her, but she's critical. The window is down to 8 hours. Marcus checked their position, ran calculations. 8 hours, 1,200 nautical miles. Hurricane Melissa accelerating on a course that would put its outer bands directly across their path in approximately 6 hours. The math didn't work. Not safely. Not if they stuck to standard routing. He pulled up chart overlays, examined bathymetric data for the Chandeleur Sound off Louisiana. The shortcut was there, the route that could save them 90 minutes if he threaded the needle through shallow waters. Catherine watched him work, saw him measuring depths. What are you looking at? Marcus traced the route with his finger. Shortcut through Chandeleur Sound. Saves 90 minutes, but the draft is tight. Aurora Crown draws 9.7 feet. Sound depth ranges from 11.5 to 12 feet, depending on tide and current. Her voice went sharp. What's the margin? Marcus met her eyes. Between 1.8 and 2.3 feet. If my calculations are off by 8 inches, we run aground. $90 million yacht sinks. We both die. Catherine didn't flinch. And if we don't take the shortcut, Marcus switched displays, showed her the hurricane track. Hurricane Melissa catches us in open Gulf waters. Category 3 by then. Survival odds are worse than the shortcut. She studied the screen, processed the choice probable death versus possible death. Her answer came without hesitation. My mother has 8 hours. Take the shortcut. Marcus nodded, adjusted their course heading, and committed them to a path that would either prove his competence or confirm every doubt that had kept him landlocked for 5 years. The call came into Victoria Cross's office at 8:47 a.m. Chicago time while she was reviewing quarterly projections. Richard Hayes's voice carried entitled irritation. Victoria, I just heard Catherine left on the Aurora Crown this morning, with a deckhand as captain, a black deckhand. Victoria leaned back in her chair, recognized opportunity. Marcus Grant, former Coast Guard apparently. Catherine made an emergency decision. Richard's tone sharpened. What are his actual qualifications? Victoria pulled up Marcus's file. Service record shows Lieutenant Commander rank, rescue operations, 15 years experience. But he's been mopping floors for 3 years. That raises questions about why a supposedly qualified officer would hide in a deckhand position. Richard's breathing changed. What else is he hiding then? Men don't go from commanding operations to cleaning toilets without reason. Could be disciplinary issues. Could be incompetence the Coast Guard covered up. Victoria's smile was audible. I'm concerned about liability exposure, Richard. If anything happens to Catherine or that yacht, the board will be held responsible for allowing unvetted personnel to assume command. Richard took the bait. Document everything. Communications, departure logs, witness statements. If this goes badly, Catherine's judgment will be questioned. The board may need to intervene. Victoria ended the call and opened a new document, incident report, Aurora Crown departure, October 2024. She began typing, building a narrative that would position Catherine's decision as reckless endangerment. By the time she finished, the document read like a legal brief prepared for litigation. She saved it, sent copies to 3 board members. Then she pulled up Marcus Grant's Coast Guard service record, the complete version that required federal information requests. The file landed in her inbox at 10:15 a.m., 73 pages of performance reviews, commendations, and incident reports. She scrolled until she found what she was looking for. Incident report. Rescue operation failure. March 14, 2019. 7 pages detailing the death of Ensign Brandon Hayes during a rescue mission. Rogue wave equipment, failure, acceptable risk assessment. Investigation concluded no commander error. Full exoneration. Victoria read it twice, looking for the angle. The investigation had cleared Marcus of wrongdoing, but investigations could be wrong or politically motivated. She composed an email to an anonymous maritime blogger. Potential story. Sterling Maritime CEO currently at sea with captain who has fatality in his service record. Coast Guard investigation cleared him, but questions remain. Interested. The response came back in minutes. Send me everything you have. Victoria attached Marcus's service record with the incident report highlighted, then sat back and waited for the story to go viral. And Catherine Sterling would be facing a board vote on her continued fitness to lead. Marcus pushed the Aurora Crown to 26 knots, riding the edge of optimal fuel efficiency while maximizing speed. The yacht handled like a dream, responding to his commands with precision that made navigation feel less like work and more like conversation. Catherine had been quiet for the past hours, staring at her phone, refreshing hospital updates every 30 seconds. Finally, she spoke, voice raw. "My father will be at the hospital when I arrive." Marcus glanced at her, recognized the weight in those words. "How long since you've seen him?" Catherine's laugh came out bitter. 5 years. Since he told me I was destroying everything he'd built. Since my mother's stroke that he blamed on stress I caused. Since he decided I valued business over family and stopped speaking to me. The pain in her voice was familiar. Marcus knew what it felt like to carry guilt for hurting someone you loved. His voice came out gentler than intended. "What will you say to him?" Catherine's fingers tightened on her phone. "I don't know. Sorry feels inadequate. I love you feels presumptuous after 5 years of silence." Marcus thought about Brandon Hayes, about Leah, about all the conversations they'd never finished. Say you love him. Say you're sorry. Say anything, because I'd give everything to say one more word to the people I've lost. Don't waste the chance when you have it. Catherine turned to look at him, fully really seeing him. "Who did you lose besides Ensign Hayes?" Marcus kept his eyes on the navigation display. "My wife, Leah, lung cancer, diagnosed January 20. 18 months later, she was gone." Catherine's breath caught. "I'm sorry." Marcus nodded. Acknowledgement, didn't trust his voice for more. They sailed in silence after that, the kind that felt less like absence of words and more like shared understanding of grief. The phone in Marcus's pocket buzzed at 11:23 a.m. He checked the caller ID, Nadine Brooks. Let it go to voicemail because he was approaching the Seaway transition and needed both hands. The message notification appeared 2 minutes later. Marcus waited until they were clear before listening. Nadine's voice came through tight with controlled anger. "Marcus, it's Nadine. Isaiah's okay, but he got in a fight at school yesterday. Punched a kid named Tommy Henderson, who told him black people can't be captains. 2 days suspension." Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. Nadine continued, "I told them the truth, that you're a former Coast Guard lieutenant commander. That Tommy Henderson was spreading lies about a decorated officer." Mrs. Walsh backpedaled so fast I thought she'd trip. The message ended with, "Isaiah fought for you today, Marcus. Defended you because he believes in you. Maybe it's time you believed in yourself." Marcus deleted the message, stared at the horizon. His son had punched another kid. First fight of Isaiah's life. Because some 8-year-old had absorbed his parents' racism and weaponized it against a 7-year-old whose only crime was having a father who cleaned floors. Catherine's voice cut through his thoughts. "What's wrong?" Marcus's jaw worked before words came out. "My son got suspended from school for fighting because another kid told him black people can't be captains." Catherine's face went rigid with fury. Jesus Christ, he's 7 years old. What the hell kind of parent teaches that to their child? Marcus's laugh came out sharp. "The kind who sees people like me and assumes we're only good for cleaning." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, then, "I've been making calls during the voyage, looking into Victoria Cross's background. Finding things." Marcus glanced at her. "What kind of things?" Catherine pulled out her tablet. "Sterling Maritime has paid out $2.4 million in harassment settlements over 7 years. 91 employees, all minority or working class white. Victoria was involved directly or indirectly in every single case." Marcus's stomach dropped. Russ had shown him the files, but hearing Catherine confirm, it meant the information had reached someone with power to act. Catherine continued, "Your coffee incident yesterday, number 52, in a documented pattern. And I just found out Victoria was a junior attorney on a 1996 case involving my father racial discrimination lawsuit on his destroyer that got buried with a settlement in Endo." Marcus processed the implications. "She's been leveraging that case to protect herself." Catherine nodded. 28 years of dirt on the Sterling family. That's how she survived. The pieces fell into place. Victoria wasn't just racist. She was strategic, building leverage systematically. Marcus's voice came out flat. "What are you going to do about it?" Catherine met his eyes. "When we get back, I'm burning it all down. Federal investigation. Voiding the NDAs. Making sure every one of those 91 employees gets justice. And firing Victoria with enough documentation that she never works in this industry again." Marcus wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that Catherine meant what she said. His skepticism must have shown because Catherine's voice went sharp. You don't believe me. Marcus chose his words carefully. I believe you mean it right now. Whether you still mean it when Victoria plays her cards and your father's reputation is on the line, that's different. Catherine's jaw set. My father made his choices in '96. He's going to have to own them. This ends. And if that means his reputation takes damage, then that's the price of justice he should have paid 28 years ago. Marcus studied her face looking for tells, found nothing but determination that looked genuine. He nodded, went back to navigation, and filed Catherine's promise under things he'd believe when he saw evidence. Coast Guard Key West contacted them at 2:47 p.m. with updated weather information. The radio crackled. Aurora Crown, this is Coast Guard Key West. Hurricane Melissa has accelerated. Current position 140 nautical miles east of your projected route. Forward speed increased to 18 knots. Window for safe passage now estimated 3 hours maximum. Marcus checked the chronometer, ran new calculations. 3 hours. They were currently 6 hours from Nassau at optimal speed. The shortcut would save 90 minutes, putting them 5 hours out. Still 2 hours too long. He keyed the mic, Coast Guard Key West copy, request updated bathymetric data for Chandeleur Sound. The response came back uncertain. Aurora Crown Chandeleur Sound is not recommended for vessels of your draft during hurricane approach. Suggest alternate routing through Mobile Bay Deep Channel. Marcus pulled up comparative charts. Mobile Bay would add 40 minutes, make the margin even tighter. Catherine's voice cut in, how bad? Marcus showed her the updated tracking, hurricanes moving faster than projected. Safe route means arriving 15 minutes too late. Dangerous route means threading a needle with hurricane winds building. Catherine's phone buzzed. She read the message, face going pale. My mother's vitals are deteriorating. Doctors give her 6 hours maximum. The math was brutal. Safe route meant arriving too late. Dangerous route meant margins measured in inches, one mistake meaning death. Marcus had made this calculation before. March 14, 2019. Assess risk, evaluate options, make the call. He'd been wrong then. Brandon Hayes had died because Marcus assessed 18% probability as acceptable risk. His voice came out rough. The Chandeleur route is dangerous. If I miscalculate depth by 8 inches, we run aground. If wind drift exceeds my projections, we run aground. Any of those scenarios means we sink. Catherine's answer came without hesitation. My mother has 6 hours. We have 5.5 if you take the dangerous road. That's the only math that matters. Marcus looked at her, saw determination that didn't leave room for doubt. Saw the same calculation he'd made with Brandon Hayes attempt the rescue despite elevated risk or retreat to safety and let someone die. Maybe this was redemption, a second chance to prove he could make the hard call and execute it successfully. Marcus adjusted course heading, committed them to Chandeleur Sound, and prayed his calculations would hold. The shortcut approach required precision that made Marcus's earlier navigation look casual. He slowed to 18 knots as they entered the Sound, eyes locked on depth readings that updated every half second. 11.9 feet, 11.7, 11.5. Catherine sat rigid, watching the depth gauge like it was counting down to execution. The Aurora Crown drew 9.7 feet. That left them between 1.8 and 2.3 feet of clearance, 18 inches to 2 feet. The margin between life and death measured in less space than Isaiah's height. Marcus adjusted heading 0.3 degrees to starboard, following bathymetric contours that existed in his head as a three-dimensional model. Every calculation assuming perfect conditions, physics behaving exactly as predicted. 11.3 feet, 11.1, 11.0. Catherine's breathing quickened. Marcus kept his own respiration controlled. 10.8 feet, 10.6. The clearance dropped to less than 12 inches. Marcus could feel the subtle changes in water resistance. His hands made micro-adjustments, responding to data his conscious mind hadn't fully processed. Pure skill, the accumulation of 15 years translated into muscle memory. 10.4 feet, 10.2. Catherine made a sound in her throat that might have been prayer. 10.0 feet, 9.9. 3 inches of clearance. The width of Marcus's hand. Marcus's voice came out absolutely calm. Trust the instruments. Trust the physics. The depth gauge held at 9.9 feet for 17 seconds that felt like 17 hours. Then it ticked upward, 10.0, 10.2, 10.5. They were through. The sound opened up ahead, depth increasing to 11.8 feet, 12.3, 13.0. Marcus exhaled for what felt like the first time in 5 minutes. Increased speed back to 24 knots. Catherine's voice came out shaky. Did we just clear that by 3 inches? Marcus kept his eyes forward. About 1.2 inches at the narrowest point, but 3 inches sounds better. Catherine started laughing, the kind of slightly hysterical sound that came from surviving something that should have killed you. When she finally stopped, her voice carried something new. Not just respect, but awe. That was the most insane thing I've ever witnessed. Marcus shook his head. That was calculated risk executed with acceptable margins. Catherine studied him. You've done things like that before. It wasn't a question. Marcus answered anyway. Rescue operations in 40-foot seas. Night extractions with zero visibility. The Coast Guard doesn't give you Master Mariner certification for sailing in calm water. Catherine went quiet, but the quality of her silence had changed. She was seeing him now. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Grant, who'd spent 15 years mastering one of the most demanding professions in maritime service. The question came out soft. Why did you hide this? Marcus considered lying. Then he looked at Catherine's face and saw genuine curiosity unmarred by judgment. Because being competent meant being responsible. And I couldn't handle responsibility after I failed someone who trusted me. Cleaning floors meant nobody depended on me for anything that mattered. Nobody died because I made the wrong call about mop technique. Catherine absorbed this. But you just made a dozen life or death decisions getting us through that sound. How is that different? Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. Because you gave me no choice. Your mother's dying. Nobody else was available. I could either help or let her die while I hid behind fear. Catherine's voice went sharp with insight. Or maybe you've been waiting for someone to force you back into the water. Because you knew hiding was wrong, but couldn't make yourself stop without external pressure. Marcus didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because she might be right. They sailed toward Nassau while Hershey and Melissa tracked closer. The outer bands hit them at 6:14 p.m., 53 nautical miles from Nassau. The first swells hit at 42 feet, building rapidly toward 50 as wind speed increased from 30 knots to 45. Rain reduced visibility to less than 200 feet. Catherine's voice came out tight. How bad is it going to get? Marcus checked radar. We're hitting the northern outer bands. Should stay below hurricane force winds if the track holds. But we're looking at 60-knot sustained gusts to 80 Cs up to 60 feet for the next 90 minutes. Catherine's face went pale. Can we make it? Marcus's answer was honest. I don't know. This is the edge of what Aurora Crown is designed to handle. If we catch a rogue wave over 70 feet, if the stabilization systems fail, if I make a mistake, we're done. Catherine nodded, strapped her safety harness tighter, and went quiet. The swells built to 55 feet, massive walls of water that the Aurora Crown climbed and descended with stomach-dropping regularity. Marcus rode the rhythm, timing his heading adjustments to take swells at optimal angles. Lightning flashed, illuminating towering waves. Thunder followed close enough to rattle the bridge windows. The wind screamed against Aurora Crown's superstructure. Marcus had been through worse, but those missions had been on Coast Guard cutters designed for extreme weather. Aurora Crown was tough, but she wasn't a warship. A swell hit them at 62 feet, larger than the surrounding pattern. Marcus saw it coming 3 seconds before impact, made split-second calculations, committed to a course correction. The Aurora Crown climbed the wave face at a 30-degree angle, engine screaming, bow pointing toward invisible sky. They reached the crest, hung suspended, then dropped down the backside. The impact at the trough sent shudders through the hull. Equipment rattled. Something crashed in the galley. The yacht tilted to port at 42 degrees, held there for 3 seconds, then slowly righted to 38, 32, 25. Catherine's voice came out strangled. Jesus Christ, Marcus. Marcus's hands stayed steady. Aurora Crown's rated to 45 degrees. We had 3 degrees of margin. Catherine's laugh sounded hysterical. 3 degrees sounds a lot like 3 inches in that sound. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. I'm consistent, at least. They rode the storm for another hour, Marcus making constant micro-adjustments. The swells gradually decreased 58 feet, 53, 47, 40. By 7:45 p.m., they'd cleared the worst of it. Rain was still heavy, but visibility had improved to 500 feet. Wind had dropped to 40 knots. Seas were down to 35 feet. Nassau's lights appeared through the rain at 8:02 p.m. like salvation made visible. Marcus keyed the radio. Nassau Harbor Control, this is Aurora Crown requesting emergency priority docking medical evacuation. The response came immediately. Aurora Crown, you are cleared for Pier 7 emergency medical transport standing by. Captain Grant, that was one hell of a crossing. Finest seamanship I've witnessed in 30 years. Marcus didn't respond to the compliment, focused on approach navigation. He brought Aurora Crown in at 12 knots, reduced to 6 as they approached the pier, executed a docking that was soft enough that Catherine barely felt the hull touch. He shut down the engines, sat back, and realized his hands were shaking from adrenaline crash. Catherine unbuckled, stood on legs that weren't entirely steady, then pulled him into a hug that felt desperate and grateful. Her voice came out muffled against his shoulder. You saved my life. You saved my mother's life. You did something impossible. Marcus awkwardly returned the embrace. Just did my job, ma'am. Catherine pulled back, tears streaming. Your job was mopping floors. This was something else. This was heroic. Marcus shook his head. This was physics and procedure. Nothing heroic about executing training. Catherine studied his face, seemed about to argue, then checked her phone and her expression shifted to pure panic. My mother, I need to get to the hospital now. She was out of the bridge before Marcus could respond, running toward the gangway. Marcus sat alone at the captain's chair, surrounded by instruments that showed all systems optimal, a crossing that should have killed them, executed with precision. Brandon Hayes' voice echoed in his head, but different this time. Hell of a job, Commander, Marcus whispered to the empty bridge. Thanks for riding with me, Brandon. He walked to the gangway and stepped onto Nassau soil as the sun set over a harbor he'd reached against impossible odds. The Nassau hospital smelled like antiseptic and desperation, that particular combination of industrial cleaning products and human fear that made Marcus's throat close up with memories of sitting in Chicago oncology wards watching Leah fade. Catherine disappeared through emergency doors before he could offer support, leaving him alone in a waiting room filled with other people's crises. His phone showed 63 missed calls and 412 notifications. Marcus stared at the numbers without comprehension, brain too fried from 18 hours of navigation to process what could possibly generate that much attention. He thumbed through recent calls. Russ Donovan, 17 times. Nadine Brooks, 8 times. Numbers he didn't recognize, area codes from cities he'd never visited. The first voicemail was Russ' voice, tight with urgency. Marcus, don't read the news. Don't look at social media. Just call me back immediately. Marcus's stomach dropped. He opened a news app, typed his own name into the search bar, and watched his world detonate. Sterling Maritime and Danger CEO with troubled captain blazed across his screen in letters that felt like physical blows. The article detailed Brandon Hayes' death with language carefully designed to imply negligence the Coast Guard had covered up. Anonymous sources questioned Marcus's fitness for command. Speculation about why a supposedly qualified officer would spend 3 years mopping floors painted pictures of incompetence, cowardice, disgrace. The comments section was worse. Hundreds of maritime professionals and random internet strangers dissecting his service record, his choices, his worth as a human being. Half called him a murderer who'd killed a white sailor and escaped justice through bureaucratic protection. The other half called him a diversity hire who'd never deserved his rank in the first place. Marcus sat in a plastic chair and watched his reputation burn in real time. His phone buzzed. Nadine's name appeared on screen. He answered because ignoring her would only make things worse. I saw. Nadine's voice came through sharp with protective fury. Baby, this is garbage. Lies built on taking facts out of context. You were cleared. The investigation was thorough. Anyone with half a brain who reads the actual report knows you did nothing wrong. Marcus's voice came out flat dead. Doesn't matter. The damage is done. By the time I get back to Chicago, Sterling Maritime will have fired me to protect their reputation. Catherine will pretend this voyage never happened, and I'll be unemployable in maritime work anywhere in the country. Nadine's tone shifted to something fiercer. Catherine Sterling called me 3 hours ago, from the middle of a damn hurricane. Told me to tell you that when you get back, she's promoting you to chief captain and burning Victoria Cross's career to the ground. Direct quote, Marcus Grant saved my life and my mother's life. I will destroy anyone who tries to destroy him. Marcus wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that Catherine meant what she'd said during the voyage, that she'd stand by him when the board applied pressure and Victoria deployed her leverage. But he'd been disappointed before by people who promised support until it became inconvenient. His voice stayed cautious. She said that before the article went viral, before board members started calling for her head, before this became a choice between me and her career. Nadine made a dismissive sound. That woman sailed through a hurricane with you, watched you thread needles that should have killed you both. She knows exactly who you are and what you're worth. Have some faith, Marcus. Marcus wanted faith, wanted to believe the universe occasionally worked out in favor of people who tried to do right. But Brandon Hayes had tried to do right, had followed Marcus's orders and deployed into conditions he'd been trained to handle, and he'd died anyway because sometimes trying wasn't enough. He ended the call with promises to contact Nadine. When he knew more, then sat in the waiting room and watched strangers grieve, while his phone continued exploding with notifications he didn't have energy to process. Admiral William Sterling found Marcus at 9:47 p.m., sitting in the same plastic chair, staring at the same wall, trapped in the same spiral of thoughts that led nowhere productive. The Admiral was 69 years old, built like a man who'd spent 40 years in Navy service, with silver hair cut military short and eyes that had witnessed things most people couldn't imagine. He wore civilian clothes but carried himself with bearing that announced his rank to anyone who understood the language. He sat in the chair beside Marcus without invitation. "You brought my daughter through Hurricane Melissa." Marcus's voice came out rough from disuse. "Yes, sir." William studied him with an intensity that felt like being assessed for fitness. "Russ Donovan sent me your service record. Full file, not the sanitized version Sterling Maritime saw. 15 years Coast Guard rescue operations. 2 distinguished service medals. Letter of commendation from the Commandant himself. Cape Hatteras Hurricane Response Station for 8 years. Marcus didn't respond. His record spoke for itself for whatever that was worth in a world where anonymous bloggers could destroy reputations overnight. William continued, voice carrying weight that made each word feel deliberate. "Also read the Brandon Hayes incident report. Full investigation findings, not the bullshit that Maritime Blogger published. Equipment failure during acceptable risk operation. No commander error. Recommendation for continued service and promotion track." Marcus's jaw tightened. Investigation was wrong. William's eyebrows rose. "How so?" Marcus met the Admiral's eyes. "I saw the radar anomaly. Assessed 18% probability of rogue wave formation. Gave deployment order anyway because 18% fell within acceptable risk parameters. Brandon Hayes died because I prioritized mission success over caution." William absorbed this, processed it with the experience of someone who'd commanded ships through situations where every decision carried consequences measured in lives. "So you made a calculated risk assessment based on available data and standard operating procedures. The risk materialized. Someone died, and you've been punishing yourself for 5 years because you believe you should have predicted the unpredictable." Marcus's voice went sharp. "I should have weighted the risk differently. Should have factored in that Brandon was young and inexperienced on his 4th deployment. Should have given more consideration to the fact that 18% isn't 0%. William's expression shifted to something that looked like recognition. "I lost my XO in 1996. Lieutenant Junior Grade Michael Rawlings, engine room fire on USS Thompson. 20 years we served together. Investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, but I knew. I'd pushed our damage control drills to every other week instead of weekly because we were behind on maintenance schedules. That extra week meant slower response time when the fire started. 37 seconds slower according to after-action analysis. Michael died in those 37 seconds. Marcus went still, understanding dawning that Admiral William Sterling wasn't just making conversation. William continued, voice carrying pain that hadn't faded in 28 years. "I spent 2 years blaming myself. Stopped sailing. Couldn't look at water without seeing Michael's face. Then his widow Patricia showed up at my door. I thought she was going to scream at me, blame me, destroy me the way I was destroying myself." Marcus's throat tightened. "What did she do?" William's smile carried no humor. "She hugged me. Told me Michael would be furious if I quit sailing. Said he'd haunt me for the rest of my life if I wasted the gift he saw in me. She was right. Michael loved the Navy more than anything except Patricia. Throwing away my career because of guilt would have been an insult to everything he believed in." Marcus processed this, looked for the angle, the manipulation, the way this story was designed to make him feel better about choices that had gotten someone killed. Found nothing but honesty in William's face. The Admiral's voice dropped lower. "You stopped sailing because you carry Brandon Hayes. I kept sailing because I tried to forget Michael Rawlings. You want to know which approach was right? Neither, and both. Because there is no right way to carry the dead Marcus. You just carry them and keep moving forward, or you let them bury you too." The words hit Marcus like revelation. He'd spent 5 years assuming his guilt was appropriate penance, that hiding was the only ethical response to failure, that accepting invisibility was how you honored the people you'd lost. But maybe guilt without action was just another form of cowardice. Maybe the real way to honor Brandon Hayes was to keep sailing to be better to save the lives Brandon would have saved if he'd lived. Marcus's voice came out barely audible. How do you live with it? William met his eyes. By remembering that Michael's death doesn't erase the 100 people I saved before him or the 100 I saved after. By understanding that command means accepting you'll make decisions with incomplete information, and sometimes those decisions will be wrong. By sailing anyway because the alternative is letting fear win. They sat in silence after that, two men who'd lost people they commanded, who carried guilt that didn't respond to logic or investigation findings or time's passage. Finally, William spoke again. Catherine tells me you're the finest captain she's ever sailed with. Said you executed maneuvers she didn't think were possible. Made decisions that saved her life and her mother's life. That sounds like someone who should be mopping floors. Marcus's answer came honest. That sounds like someone who got lucky. Next time I might not be. William's laugh was short, sharp. Every captain gets lucky. The difference between good captains and great ones is that great captains make their own luck through skill preparation and refusing to quit when things get hard. You made your luck today, Marcus. Own it. Eleanor Sterling survived surgery but remained critical, surrounded by monitors and tubes and medical equipment that beeped with reassuring regularity. Catherine sat beside her mother's bed, holding a hand that felt too fragile, watching shallow breaths that proved life persisted despite trauma. William entered the room at 10:23 p.m., stopped in the doorway like a man unsure of his welcome. Catherine looked up, met her father's eyes for the first time in 5 years, and felt every word they'd never said hang between them like smoke. Eleanor's voice came out weak but clear. Both of you, sit down, now. Catherine and William moved to opposite sides of the bed, sat in chairs that put Eleanor between them like a referee positioned to stop violence. Eleanor's eyes moved from daughter to husband and back. 5 years. 5 years you've been too stubborn to speak to each other. 5 years I've watched both of you suffer because you'd rather be right than be family. It ends. Tonight. Or so help me God, I will haunt both of you for the rest of your lives. Catherine's voice came out thick. Mom, you need to rest. Eleanor cut her off with a look that would have worked on subordinates when she'd been teaching. I need my family to stop being idiots. William, tell your daughter what you should have said in 2019. William's face went through several emotions before settling on resignation. I was wrong about the company modernization, about blaming you for stress that contributed to your mother's stroke, about cutting you out instead of trusting that you knew what you were doing. I'm sorry, Catherine, for all of it. Catherine's chest went tight. She'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times, had scripted responses ranging from acceptance to rejection to fury. Now that it was happening, all her prepared words evaporated. Her answer came simple, honest. I'm sorry too, for not trying harder to make you understand the changes, for letting pride keep me from reaching out after Mom's stroke, for wasting 5 years being angry instead of fixing things. Eleanor's smile was small but genuine. See, that wasn't so hard. Now hug and stop being dramatic. Catherine stood, moved around the bed, and let her father pull her into an embrace that smelled like the cologne he'd worn her entire childhood. They held each other while Eleanor watched with satisfaction, and something that had been broken for 5 years began slowly knitting back together. When they separated, William's voice carried new weight. The young man who brought you here, Marcus Grant. I spoke with him, read his full service record. He's extraordinary, Catherine, and he's being destroyed in the media by people who don't understand what command actually requires. Catherine's expression hardened. Victoria Cross leaked his service record to a blogger, framed Brandon Hayes' death as negligence instead of the equipment failure the investigation documented. She's trying to use Marcus's past to force a board review of my judgment. William processed this, made connections that came from decades navigating Navy politics. Victoria Cross, junior attorney on the 1996 Thompson lawsuit. I remember her. Smart, ambitious, understood exactly how to weaponize information for maximum damage. Catherine pulled out her tablet, showed William the files Russ had compiled. She's been running the same playbook for 7 years at Sterling Maritime. 91 employees forced out through harassment and discrimination. 2.4 million in settlements buried under NDAs. And she's been using your 1996 case as leverage to protect herself whenever anyone gets close to exposing the pattern. William's face went pale. Jesus Christ, I gave her the blueprint. Catherine's voice stayed level. You made a mistake in 1996, stayed silent when you should have spoken up, protected your career instead of doing right. Victoria learned from that and turned it into systematic discrimination. But that ends now. William met his daughter's eyes. What do you need from me? Catherine's answer came without hesitation. I need you to come back to Sterling Maritime. Testify about 1996. Remove the leverage Victoria's been using. Help me burn this entire structure down and rebuild it correctly. William absorbed the magnitude of what she was asking. Public confession to 28-year-old wrongdoing, reputation damage, possible legal consequences from reopening cases settled under NDA. Everything he protected by staying silent offered up as sacrifice to fix what his silence had enabled. His answer matched his daughter's resolve. When do we start? Russ Donovan's plane landed in Nassau at 11:47 p.m. carrying 3 briefcases full of documentation that would destroy Victoria Cross's career and possibly send her to federal prison. He found Marcus in the hospital waiting room, still sitting in the same chair, phone dark in his hands because he'd stopped checking notifications after the first 500. Russ sat down heavily. You look like hell. Marcus's laugh came out hollow. Read the news. Apparently I am hell. Incompetent killer who got a white sailor murdered and somehow convinced the Coast Guard to cover it up. Russ opened the first briefcase, pulled out a folder marked Cross V, Communications Archive. Victoria sent the blogger your service record with the investigation findings removed. Framed Brandon Hayes' death as negligence. You escaped through institutional racism favoring minority officers. Also sent emails to 4 board members suggesting Catherine's judgment is compromised and you're a liability who should be terminated immediately. Marcus took the folder, flipped through printed emails that documented Victoria's campaign in detail. Why are you showing me this? Russ opened the second briefcase. Because tomorrow morning we're flying back to Chicago. Catherine's calling an emergency board meeting, and we're presenting evidence that will end Victoria Cross's career while simultaneously exonerating you and exposing 28 years of Sterling family complicity in discrimination. Marcus stared at the old man. Catherine agreed to this. Russ's smile carried satisfaction. Catherine ordered it. Admiral Sterling's testifying about the 1996 case. We're voiding all 91 NDAs on grounds they were procured through fraud and coercion. We're contacting the Department of Labor about federal investigation into industry-wide patterns. And we're making sure every person Victoria Cross hurt gets justice. Marcus wanted to believe it would work. Wanted to trust that evidence and testimony would overcome Victoria's political skills and board members' desire to avoid scandal. But he'd watched investigations clear him while his reputation burned, had seen truth matter less than narrative. His skepticism must have shown because Russ's voice went harder. This isn't Coast Guard bureaucracy trying to avoid bad publicity. This is Catherine Sterling willing to sacrifice her father's reputation and her company's short-term stock price to do the right thing. She's all in, Marcus. Question is whether you are. Marcus thought about Isaiah, about a 7-year-old who'd punched another kid for defending his father's honor. About Brandon Hayes, who'd trusted Marcus enough to deploy into dangerous conditions. About Leah, who'd left him a letter 3 years ago that he still hadn't read because opening it meant accepting she was gone. His voice came out steady. What do you need from me? Russ handed him the third briefcase. Your testimony, full account of the voyage, the navigation decisions, Catherine's responses. Documentation that she acted appropriately given emergency circumstances. Proof that you executed every procedure correctly despite not having captained anything in 5 years. Marcus opened the briefcase, found forms and affidavits and legal documents that would require him to relive 18 hours he'd rather forget. When Russ checked his watch, board meetings at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Chicago time. We have a chartered flight leaving Nassau at 6 a.m. That gives you 6 hours to sleep, review testimony, and prepare to defend yourself in front of 9 people who'll be deciding whether you're a hero or a liability. Marcus looked at the documentation, at the evidence that might save his reputation or might get dismissed as desperate counterattack by a disgraced officer and the CEO who'd been foolish enough to trust him. He started reading. The flight back to Chicago departed on schedule, Marcus running on 3 hours of sleep and enough coffee to wire him into jittery hyper-awareness. Catherine sat across from him in the private jet reviewing her own testimony, while her father occupied a seat near the front, making notes on legal pads with the focused intensity of a man preparing for battle. Marcus's phone had been silent since they'd boarded, but he knew the internet hadn't stopped. The article had metastasized overnight, picked up by mainstream news outlets who love stories about corporate malfeasance, and unqualified employees endangering wealthy CEOs. His name was trending on social media platforms. He didn't use his face appearing in think pieces about DEI hiring and maritime safety and whether the Coast Guard's investigation procedures were adequate. Catherine looked up from her tablet. Don't read the news. Marcus's laugh came bitter. Too late. Catherine set down her tablet, leaned forward. In 6 hours, we're walking into a board meeting where Victoria will try to destroy both of us. She'll paint you as incompetent and me as reckless. She'll use my father's 1996 case as leverage. She'll threaten to expose Sterling Maritime to lawsuits and federal investigation if we don't back down. Marcus waited for the but that had to be coming. Catherine didn't disappoint, but we have evidence she's been running a 7-year discrimination campaign. We have testimony from 91 employees. We have documentation of systematic harassment that violates federal law. And we have you, a decorated officer who executed a rescue operation that should have been impossible and made it look routine. Marcus's voice stayed flat. I'm also the officer who got Brandon Hayes killed. That's what people will remember, not the rescues that worked. Catherine's expression shifted to something fierce. Then we make them remember. We present the full context. We show them what command actually looks like when it's done right. We prove that one tragedy doesn't erase 15 years of excellence. Marcus wanted her confidence, wanted to believe that truth would matter more than narrative, that evidence would overcome emotion, that 9 board members would look past the headlines and see him as something other than the liability Victoria had painted. Admiral Williams spoke from the front of the cabin. Marcus, can I show you something? Marcus moved to the seat beside the Admiral. William pulled out his phone, brought up a maritime professional forum that Marcus had been avoiding. Read the comments, not the ones from random internet trolls, the ones from actual Coast Guard veterans and professional mariners. Marcus scrolled through, found comments from users with verified credentials. Served with LTCDR grant at Cape Hatteras, 2015 to 2017. Best officer I ever worked under. The Hayes incident was equipment failure, not command error. Anyone saying otherwise doesn't understand rescue operations. I was on the investigation team for the Hayes case. We went through everything with microscopic detail. Grant's risk assessment was textbook correct. The rogue wave probability was within acceptable parameters. This is a hit piece, not journalism. Retired Master Chief here. Ran damage control with Grant on USCG Stratton 2011-2014. That man saved my life twice and prevented a catastrophic engine failure that would have killed 8 people. He's forgotten more about seamanship than most captains will ever know. The comments continued, dozens of them, Coast Guard veterans and maritime professionals defending Marcus's record, calling out the blogger's distortions, providing context the article had deliberately omitted. William's voice came quiet. Your reputation isn't as destroyed as you think. The people who matter, the ones who actually understand what you do, they know the truth. Victoria Cross targeted the court of public opinion because she knew she'd lose in any court that actually examined evidence. Marcus read through more comments, felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. He wasn't alone, wasn't universally condemned. People who'd served with him, who understood the reality of rescue operations, who knew the difference between tragedy and negligence, they were defending him. Catherine joined them, read over Marcus's shoulder. See, you're not the liability Victoria wants the board to believe you are. You're an asset she's trying to eliminate because you threaten her narrative. Marcus closed the phone, looked at Catherine and William. What happens if we lose? If the board votes to fire me and censure you? Catherine's smile carried zero humor. Then I resign as CEO, take my family's controlling interest in Sterling Maritime, and start a competing company that puts them out of business within 2 years. But we're not going to lose Marcus, because we have truth on our side and Victoria only has lies. Marcus wanted that certainty, wanted to believe the universe occasionally rewarded people who tried to do right instead of punishing them for daring to hope. He'd know in 4 hours whether Catherine's confidence was justified or just another promise that would evaporate when circumstances got difficult. Sterling Maritime's boardroom occupied the top floor of their Chicago headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina, where Aurora Crown sat berthed after Marcus had brought her through conditions that should have sunk her. 9 board members occupied seats around a table worth more than Marcus's annual salary. Victoria Cross sat at Catherine's right hand, the COO position that gave her authority to speak, but not vote, her expression carefully neutral, in a way that made Marcus's skin crawl. Richard Hayes sat at the head of the table opposite Catherine, using his position as board chairman to establish control. This emergency session has been called to address serious concerns about recent events involving the Aurora Crown and questions regarding OCO Catherine Sterling's judgment and crisis management. Catherine's voice cut in sharp and controlled. Before we proceed, I'm invoking Board Rule 17, right to present evidence in defense against allegations. I'm also requesting my father, Admiral William Sterling, retired, be permitted to testify as relevant witness. Richard's expression flickered with uncertainty. Your father has no standing in this company. Catherine's smile could have cut glass. My father is the original founder of Sterling Maritime's predecessor company and holds relevant information about patterns of discrimination that this board needs to hear. Unless you're suggesting we should avoid evidence that might complicate your preferred narrative? Richard's face reddened, but he had no procedural grounds to refuse. Very well, Admiral Sterling may testify, but this session will proceed in orderly fashion according to established protocols. Victoria's expression remained neutral, but Marcus saw tension in her shoulders, the subtle tells that indicated she hadn't expected Catherine to bring William into this fight. Richard continued. The board has reviewed the Maritime Blogger's article regarding Captain. He paused, making the title sound like mockery. Marcus Grant's service record and the death of Ensign Brandon Hayes. We've also reviewed communications from COO Victoria Cross expressing concern about Sterling Maritime's liability exposure given Mr. Grant's troubled history. Ms. Cross, please present your position. Victoria stood, moved to a presentation screen, brought up prepared slides that made Marcus's stomach clench. The first slide showed Brandon Hayes' official Coast Guard photo. Young blonde, smiling, everything a Navy recruiting poster wanted to project about American military service. Victoria's voice carried carefully modulated concern. Brandon Hayes was 24 years old when he died under Lieutenant Commander Grant's command. The official investigation concluded equipment failure, but several facts raised questions about whether that investigation was thorough or whether institutional pressures influenced its conclusions. She clicked to the next slide showing excerpts from the incident report, with context deliberately removed. Lieutenant Commander Grant gave deployment orders despite radar showing anomalies consistent with rogue wave probability. Ensign Hayes died 30 feet from the rescue vessel when cable equipment failed under stress loads. The question this board must answer, was this truly unforeseeable equipment failure, or was it command error disguised as mechanical malfunction? Marcus's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. Victoria was doing exactly what the blogger had done, taking facts and reframing them to suggest negligence without directly accusing him of anything that could be disproven. Victoria continued, furthermore, Lieutenant Commander Grant resigned from the Coast Guard 3 weeks after this incident. Men who are confident in their innocence don't resign. They fight to clear their names. Mr. Grant's resignation suggests he knew something the investigation didn't find or chose to ignore. Catherine's voice cut through like a blade, or he was a grieving officer who'd lost someone under his command and couldn't continue regardless of legal culpability. But please continue with your character assassination disguised as due diligence. Richard shot Catherine a warning look, but didn't stop Victoria. Victoria clicked to another slide showing photos from the Aurora Crown departure. 3 days ago, CEO Sterling made an emergency decision to allow Mr. Grant, a deckhand with no recent command experience, to captain a $90 million yacht through Hurricane Melissa. This decision exposed Sterling Maritime to catastrophic liability and raised serious questions about Ms. Sterling's judgment under pressure. She paused for effect. I submit that while Ms. Sterling's desire to reach her mother was understandable, her decision to trust company assets and her own life to someone whose last command resulted in a fatality demonstrates impaired judgment that warrants board review. Marcus watched board members' faces, saw 3 nodding along with Victoria's narrative, saw 2 looking skeptical, saw 4 whose expressions gave away nothing. Richard's voice carried false gravity. Thank you, Ms. Cross. Ms. Sterling, you have the floor for your defense. Catherine stood, didn't move to the presentation screen, kept her focus on the board members. Everything Victoria just presented was technically factual and comprehensively dishonest. Yes, Brandon Hayes died. Yes, Marcus Grant resigned 3 weeks later. Yes, I trusted him to captain Aurora Crown through a hurricane. Those facts are accurate. The implications Victoria wants you to draw from them are lies. She pulled out a tablet, brought up documents on the main screen. Here is the complete Coast Guard investigation report, not the cherry-picked excerpts Victoria showed you. Conclusion: equipment failure during acceptable risk operation. Recommendation: no disciplinary action continued. Service promotion track maintained. Investigation was conducted by 3 independent officers with no connection to Lieutenant Commander Grant. It was thorough, professional, and unequivocal. Catherine clicked through pages. Here is testimony from 8 Coast Guard veterans who served with Marcus Grant. All verified credentials, all willing to testify under oath. Every single one confirms his competence, his judgment, and the fact that the Hayes incident was tragedy, not negligence. She brought up new documents. Here is Marcus Grant's complete service record, 2 distinguished service medals, letter of commendation from the Commandant, 15 years of rescue operations with a success rate of 94%, meaning he saved 94% of people he was deployed to rescue in conditions that kill most people who attempt it. Catherine's voice hardened. Now let me show you what Victoria didn't want you to see. She switched presentations, brought up the files Russ had compiled. 7 years of systematic discrimination at Sterling Maritime. 91 employees, predominantly black and working-class white, forced out through harassment and buried settlements. $2.4 million in hush money. All of it coordinated or directly executed by Victoria Cross. The boardroom went silent. Victoria's face remained neutral, but her hands gripped the table edge. Catherine continued relentless. Every incident documented. Every settlement agreement. Every NDA procured through coercion. Average tenure for minority employees 13 months. Average tenure for white employees 4.6 years. This isn't random variation. This is systematic discrimination that violates federal law. She brought up new slides. And here's how Victoria protected herself. In 1996, my father's destroyer faced a racial discrimination lawsuit. 3 black sailors' hostile environment settlement buried under NDA. The junior attorney who handled that case, Victoria Cross, age 22, fresh out of law school, learning how to weaponize silence. William Sterling stood. I was wrong in 1996. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I protected my career instead of doing what was right. And Victoria Cross learned from my mistake. She's been running the same playbook for 28 years at Sterling Maritime for the last 7. Victoria finally moved, stood with controlled precision. This is a desperate attempt to deflect from Catherine's poor judgment by attacking my character with unsubstantiated. Catherine cut her off. We have 91 signed affidavits from former employees willing to testify. We have recordings of your instructions to HR to bury complaints. We have emails where you coordinated settlements specifically to avoid creating patterns that would trigger federal review. Would you like me to play those recordings for the board? Victoria's mask slipped just for a second, showing fury beneath. Those communications are privileged. Catherine's smile was pure ice. They were privileged until you used company resources to conduct illegal discrimination. Attorney-client privilege doesn't protect criminal conspiracy, Victoria, and neither does 28 years of practice making you good at it. Richard Hayes tried to regain control. This is highly irregular. We need time to review these allegations. William interrupted. You need time to calculate whether protecting Victoria is worth federal investigation into your own conduct as board members who had oversight responsibility. Let me save you the deliberation. It's not worth it. The Department of Labor is opening an investigation regardless. The only question is whether you're defendants or witnesses. The room exploded. Board members talking over each other, Victoria demanding procedural objections be heard, Richard trying to restore order while his face went progressively redder. Catherine waited for the chaos to subside, then played her final card. Marcus Grant saved my life 3 days ago. He navigated through conditions that should have killed us both. He executed seamanship that professional captains are calling the finest they've witnessed in decades. And he did it after 5 years of being invisible because this company, this board, allowed Victoria Cross to create an environment where excellence was punished if it came from the wrong demographic. She looked directly at each board member. You have a choice. Fire me for trusting a decorated officer to do his job. Protect Victoria and face federal charges. Maintain the status quo and watch Sterling Maritime burn in public opinion and legal consequences. Or clean house, void the NDAs, cooperate with federal investigation, and rebuild this company with actual integrity. Catherine sat down. Vote however you want, but understand that I will make sure the world knows exactly what you decided and why. The vote took 3 hours of closed session deliberation that Marcus and Catherine spent in a conference room down the hall, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and waiting for their professional lives to end or transform. Russ sat with them, reviewing documents, making notes for the federal complaint he'd file if the vote went badly. William paced near the windows watching the marina, probably thinking about all the ways his confession had just complicated his legacy. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Nadine. Isaiah wants to know if you're okay. What should I tell him? Marcus typed back, tell him I'm fighting for what's right. Just like he did. Nadine's response came immediately. He says you're bigger than the sky. Always have been. Marcus stared at those words, felt them settle into his chest like weights and wings simultaneously. Catherine's voice broke his thoughts. Whatever happens in there, I want you to know you're the finest captain I've ever sailed with. And I'm honored I got to witness what you can do when circumstances force you to remember who you are. Marcus met her eyes. You barely know me. Catherine shook her head. I know you navigated through a hurricane with margins measured in inches. I know you made decisions under pressure that saved 2 lives. I know you spent 5 years hiding because you couldn't forgive yourself for a tragedy that wasn't your fault. That's everything I need to know about your character. William stopped pacing. The vote's taking too long. That either means they're genuinely deliberating or Victoria's deploying every piece of leverage she has and they're calculating costs. Russ looked up from his laptop. Department of Labor confirmed their opening investigation regardless of how this vote goes. I sent them everything an hour ago. Sterling Maritime's going to face federal scrutiny whether the board likes it or not. Marcus absorbed this, understood the implications. Catherine had just guaranteed her company would face federal investigation to protect him and 91 other employees Victoria had targeted. That wasn't politics. That was principle backed by willingness to accept consequences. The conference room door opened. Richard Hayes stood there, face unreadable. The board has reached a decision. They filed back into the boardroom. 9 board members sat in their seats, Victoria Cross notably absent. Richard's voice carried defeat. The board has voted 8-1 to terminate Victoria Cross for cause effective immediately. We're voiding all 91 NDAs and contacting affected employees to offer restitution. We're cooperating fully with Department of Labor investigation, and we're implementing third-party oversight of HR practices for a minimum of 5 years. Catherine's expression remained neutral. And the vote on my judgment regarding the Aurora Crown voyage? Richard's jaw tightened. The board finds your decision appropriate given emergency circumstances. Captain Grant's credentials and execution were both exemplary. No censure recommended. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. They'd won. Actually won. Victoria was gone, the employees would get justice, and his reputation would be defended by people with actual authority. Richard continued, clearly hating every word. The board also votes to formally apologize to Captain Marcus Grant for any suggestion his service record or competence were in question. We recognize his actions during the Aurora Crown voyage as exceptional seamanship that reflects the highest standards of maritime professionalism. Catherine stood. Captain Grant will be appointed Chief Captain of Sterling Maritime effective immediately with full authority over fleet operations and captain certifications. Salary commensurate with his credentials and experience. Any objections? Silence. Richard shook his head. Catherine's smile could have lit cities. Then this meeting is adjourned. Marcus walked out of Sterling Maritime headquarters at 4:47 p.m. Chicago time. Employment status transformed from deckhand to chief captain. Reputation defended, future suddenly open in ways he hadn't imagined possible 3 days ago. His phone exploded with messages. Nadine sending congratulations. Former Coast Guard colleagues who'd seen the news offering support. Maritime industry contacts suggesting lunch meetings to discuss his next career moves. He ignored all of them, called Isaiah instead. The boy's voice came through, breathless with excitement. Dad, Nadine showed me the news. It says you're a hero. It says you saved someone's life in a hurricane. Marcus's throat went tight. I just did my job, buddy. Isaiah's voice went fierce with pride. You're a captain again. A real captain, just like I knew you would be. Marcus leaned against his car, looked up at the sky, felt tears he'd been holding for 3 days. Finally break free. Yeah, Isaiah, I'm a captain again. For real this time. Isaiah made a sound that might have been cheering. Mom was right. She said you'd sail again. She said you'd remember. Marcus's voice cracked. Your mom was smart about a lot of things. They talked for another 10 minutes, Isaiah babbling about telling Tommy Henderson that his dad was a real captain who saved people, about showing the news article to his teacher, about wanting to go sailing as soon as Marcus had time. When Marcus hung up, he sat in his car for a long moment, processing everything that had changed in 72 hours. He'd gone from invisible to celebrated, from hiding to commanding, from convinced he'd never sail again to chief captain of a major maritime company. Brandon Hayes' voice echoed one more time, but different now. "You did it, Commander. You're back," Marcus whispered to the empty car. "We did it together, Brandon. Couldn't have gotten here without you riding along." He started the engine, drove toward Nadine's apartment to pick up Isaiah, and let himself imagine a future where sailing wasn't something he ran from, but something he ran toward. That night, after Isaiah was asleep, Marcus stood in his bedroom, looking at the dresser drawer he hadn't opened in 3 years. The drawer where Leah's letter waited. His hands were steady as he pulled it open. The white envelope sat exactly where he'd left it, her handwriting in blue ink across the front, "For Marcus when you're ready to sail again." He picked it up, held it for a long moment, then broke the seal. 3 pages. Her handwriting, neat, clear, so achingly familiar that his chest hurt just looking at it. "My love, if you're reading this, it means you're finally ready to sail again. I knew you would be. You were born for the water, Marcus. Don't let grief make you forget." Marcus's vision blurred. He wiped his eyes, kept reading. "I know you stopped sailing because of Brandon Hayes. I know you blame yourself, even though everyone says it wasn't your fault. And I know that no matter what I say, you'll carry that weight until you decide to set it down." Her voice came through the words as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. "But here's what I need you to understand. You are not your worst moment. You are not the rescue that failed. You are not the man who couldn't save everyone." Marcus's throat tightened. "You are the man who held me when I cried. The man who stayed up all night with Isaiah when he was sick. The man who works a job he hates just to keep us safe. You are brave. You are strong. You are exactly the man I fell in love with." Tears fell onto the paper. He didn't wipe them away. "And one day when you're ready, I need you to sail again. Not for me, for Isaiah. He needs to see his father whole. He needs to know that mistakes don't define us. That failure isn't final. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward anyway." Marcus thought about Isaiah, asking if his father was ever a captain, asking why he always looked at the water. "I wish I could be there when you get back on the water. I wish I could see your face when you remember who you really are. But if I can't, I need you to know this. I am so proud of you, not for what you achieve, but for who you are. For the man who keeps trying even when it hurts. For the father who loves our son more than anything. For the captain who will sail again when the time is right." Marcus was sobbing now, quietly in the darkness alone. "The ocean is waiting for you, baby. And so is the life you deserve. All my love forever and always, Leah. P.S. When you tell Isaiah about your sailing days, tell him I knew you'd find your way back. Tell him his daddy is a hero. Not because he never falls, but because he always gets back up." Marcus read the letter again and again, and a third time. By the second reading, the tears had slowed. By the third, he understood what she had been trying to tell him. He wasn't broken. He had never been broken. He had just been waiting, waiting for permission, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to tell him it was okay to live again. Leah had given him that permission 3 years ago in a letter he had been too afraid to open. Marcus folded the letter carefully, walked to the kitchen, and placed it on the refrigerator beside Isaiah's drawing. The sailboat, the 2 stick figures, the words "bigger than the sky," written in careful 7-year-old letters. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the 2 pieces of paper that represented past and future grief and hope, what he'd lost and what he'd found. Tomorrow he would start his new job. Tomorrow he would begin building the Sterling Maritime Youth Sailing Program that Catherine had already approved. Tomorrow he would take the first steps toward becoming the man his son believed him to be. But tonight, Marcus Grant stood in his kitchen and let himself remember who he used to be, who he still was, who he could become again. The invisible man had finally been seen, and he wouldn't forget. Not anymore.